guys, so we are back reading it. We're moving on to chapter 2. I don't know how well my phone's going to be able to handle this, because in my last video, it already chopped it up into 2, so we'll just have to see. Chapter 2, After the Festival, 1984. 1. The reason Adrian was wearing the hat, his sobbing boyfriend would later tell the police, was because he had won it at the push-till-you-win stall and the push-till-you-win stall at the Bassey Park Fairgrounds just 6 days before his death. He was proud of it. He was wearing it because he loved this shitty little town. The boyfriend, Don Haggerty, screamed at the cops. Now, there's no need for that sort of language, Officer Harold Gardner told Haggerty. Harold Gardner was one of Dave Gardner's 4 sons. On the day his father had discovered the lifeless one-armed body of George Denborough, Harold Gardner had been 5. On this day, almost 27 years later, he was 32 and balding. Harold Gardner recognized the reality of Don Haggerty's grief and pain, and at the same time found it impossible to take seriously. This man, if you want to call him a man, was wearing lipstick and satin pants so tight you could almost read the wrinkles in his cock. Grief or no grief, pain or no pain, he was after all just a queer, like his friend, the late Adrian Mellon. I want to be mad at this, but you can't, because it takes place at a time when homophobia was just it was running rampant. There was no so it's I get it, but also at the same time I'm like like his friend, Adrian Mellon. Let's go through it again, Harold's partner, Jeffrey Reeves said. The 2 of you came out of the Falcon and turned towards the canal. Then what? How many times do I have to tell you, idiots? Haggerty was still screaming. They killed him! They pushed him over the side. Just another day in Macho City for them. Don Haggerty began to cry. One more time, Reeves repeated patiently. You came out of the Falcon. Then what? In an interrogation room just down the hill, 2 dairy cops were speaking with Steve Dubay, 17, the clerk of probate's office upstairs. 2 more were questioning John Webby Gerton, 18, and the chief police office on the 5th floor, Chief Andrew Rademacher, and assistant district attorney Tom Boutier were questioning 15-year-old Christopher Unwin, who wore faded jeans and a grease-smeared t-shirt and blocky engineer boots, was weeping. Rademacher and Boutier had taken him because he had quite accurately assessed him as the weak link in the chain. Let's go through it again, Boutier said in his office, just as Jeffrey Reeves was saying the same thing 2 floors down. We didn't mean to kill him, Unwin blubbered. It was the hat. We couldn't believe he was still wearing a hat after what Webby said the first time, and I guess we wanted to scare him. For what he said, Chief Rademacher interjected. Yes, to John Garton on the afternoon of the 17th. Yes, to Webby. Unwin burst into fresh tears. But we tried to save him when we saw he was in trouble. At least me and Stevie Dubé did. We didn't mean to kill him. Come on, Chris, don't shit us, Boutier said. You threw the little queer into the canal. Yes, but and the 3 of you came in to make a clean breast of things, Chief Rademacher said. And I appreciate that, don't we, Andy? You bet. It takes a man to own up to what he did, Chris. So don't fuck yourself up by lying now. You meant to throw him over the minute you saw him and his fag buddy coming out of the Falcon, didn't you? No, Chris Unwin protested vehemently. Boutier took a pack of Marlboros from his pocket and stuck one in his mouth. He offered the pack to Unwin. Cigarette? Unwin took one. Boutier had to chase the tip with a match in order to give him a light because of the way Unwin's mouth was trembling. But when you saw he was wearing the hat, Rademacher asked. Unwin drank deep, lowered his head so that his greasy hair fell into his eyes, and jetted smoke from his nose, which was littered with blackheads. Yeah, he said, almost too softly to be heard. Boutier leaned forward, brown eyes gleaming. His face was predatory, but his voice was gentle. What, Chris? I said yes, I guess so. Throw him in, but not to kill him. He looked up, and his face frantic and miserable, and still unable to comprehend the stupendous changes which had taken place in his life since he had left the house to take in the last night of Derry's Canal Days festival with two of his buddies at 7:30 the previous evening. "Not to kill him," he repeated, "and that guy under the bridge, I still don't know who he was." "What guy was that?" Rademacher asked, but without much interest. They had heard this part before as well, and neither of them believed it. Sooner or later, men accused of murder almost always dragged that mysterious other guy. Berthier still even had a name for it. He called it the one-armed man syndrome, after that old TV series, The Fugitive. "The guy in the clown suit," Chris Unwin said and shivered. "The guy with the balloons." 3. The Canal Days Festival, which ran from July 15th to July 21st, had been a rousing success. Most Derry residents agreed, a great thing for the city's morale, image, and pocketbook. The week-long festival was pegged to mark the centenary for the opening of the canal, which ran through the middle of downtown. It had been the canal which had fully opened Derry to the lumber trade in the years 1884 to 1910. It had been the canal which had birthed Derry's boom years. The town was spruced up from the east to west and north to south. Potholes, which some residents swore hadn't been patched for 10 years or more, were neatly filled with hot top and rolled smooth. The town buildings were refurbished on the inside and repainted on the outside. The worst of the graffiti in Basie Park, much of it coolly logical anti-gay sentiments such as "kill all queers" and AIDS from God, you hellbound homos. Holy shit! I wish I could edit. I want to go, back to the beginning and put, a warning for slurs. Warning, guys! Slurs! Was sanded off the benches and wooden walls from the little covered walkway in the canal known as the Kissing Bridge. The Canal Days Museum was installed in 3 empty storefronts downtown and filled with exhibits by Michael Hanlon, the local librarian and amateur historian. The town's oldest families loaned freely of their almost priceless treasures, and during the week of the festival, nearly 40,000 visitors paid a quarter each to look at the eating house menus from the 1890s and lager bits axes and peavies from the 1880s, children toys from the 1920s, and over 2,000 photographs in 9 reels of movie film of life as it had been in Derry over the last 100 years. The museum was sponsored by the Derry Ladies' Society, which vetoed some of Hamlin's proposed exhibits, such as the notorious tramp chair from the 1930s, and photographs such as those of Bradley Gang after the notorious shootout. But all agreed it was a great success, and no one really wanted to see those gory old things anyway. It was so much better to accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative, as the old song said. As people in Derry often do. Support the positive, forget all the bad stuff, like the children disappearance that happen every 20 or so years. There was this huge striped refreshment tent in Derry Park, and a band concerts there every night. In Basie Park there was a carnival with rides by Smokey's Greater Shows and games run by the local townfolk. A special tram car circled the historic sections of the town every hour on the hour, and ended up at this gaudy, amiable money machine. It was there that Adrian Mallon wore the hat which would get him killed, and the paper top hat with the flower in the band which said, "I Heart Derry." 4. "I'm tired," John Webby Garden said. Like his two friends, he was dressed in unconscious imitation of Bruce Springsteen, although if asked, he would probably call Springsteen a wimp or a fagola, and would instead profess its admiration for such bitchin' heavy metal groups as Def Leppard, Twisted Sister, or Judas Priest. The sleeves of his plain blue t-shirt were torn off, showing his heavily muscled arms. His thick brown hair fell over one eye. This touch was more John Cougar Mellencamp than Springsteen. There were blue tattoos on his arms, arcane symbols which looked as if they had been drawn by a child. "I don't want to talk no more." Just tell us about Tuesday afternoon at the fair. Paul Hughes said. Hughes was tired and shocked and dismayed by this whole sordid business. He thought again and again that it was as if Derry Canal days ended with one final event, which everyone had somehow known about, which no one had quite dared put down on the daily program of events. If they had, it would have looked like this. Saturday, 9 p.m. Final band concert featuring the Derry High School Band and the Barber Shop Mellowmen. Saturday, 10 p.m. Giant fireworks show. Saturday, 10:35 p.m. Ritual sacrifice of Adrian Mellon officially ends Canal Days. Fuck the fair, Webby replied. Just what you said to Mellon and what he said to you. Oh, Christ, Webby rolled his eyes. Come on, Webby, Hugh's partner said. Webby Garton rolled his eyes and began again. 5. Garton saw the two of them, Mellon and Haggerty, mincing along with their arms about each other's waists and giggling like a couple of girls. At first he actually thought they were a couple of girls. Then he recognized Mellon, who had been pointed out to him before. As he looked, he saw Mellon turn to Haggerty, and they kissed briefly. "Oh, man, I'm gonna barf," Webby cried, disgusted. Chris Unwin and Steve DeBay were with him. When Webby pointed out Mellon, Steve DeBay thought the other fag was named Don somebody, and that he'd picked up a kid from Derry High, hitching, and then tried to put a few moves on him. Mellon and Haggerty began to move towards the three boys again, walking away from the pitch till you win, and toward the Carney's exit. Webby Garton would later tell officers Hughes and Connolly that his civic pride had been wounded by seeing a fucking faggot wearing a hat which said, "I heart Derry." It was a silly thing, that hat, a paper imitation of a top hat, with a great flower sticking out from the top, and nodding about in every direction. The silliness of the hat apparently wounded Webby's civic pride even more, and Mellon and Haggerty passed, each with its arm linked about the other's waist. Webby Garton yelled out, "I ought to make you eat that hat, you fucking ass bandit." Mellon turned towards Garton and fluttered his eyes flirtatiously and said, "If you want something to eat, hon, I can find something much tastier than my hat." At this point, Webby Garton decided that he was going to rearrange the faggot's face. Oh my god. Wow, I way underestimated how terrible this was. I can find something much tastier than my hat. At this point, Webby Garton decided he was going to rearrange the faggot's face. In the geography of Mellon's face, the mountains would rise and the continents would drift. Nobody suggested he sucked the root. Nobody. He started towards Mellon. Mellon's friend Haggerty, alarmed, attempted to pull Mellon away, but Mellon stood his ground, smiling. Garton would later tell officers Hughes and Connolly that he was pretty sure Mellon was high on something. So he was. Haggerty would agree with this idea, passed on to him by Officer Gardner and Reeves. He was high on 2 fried doughboys smeared with honey and the carnival on the whole day. He had been consequently unable to recognize the real menace which Webby Garton presented. "But that was Adrian," Don said, using the tissue to wipe his eyes and smearing his spangled eyeshadow he was wearing. "He didn't have much in the way of protective coloration. He was one of those fools who think things really are going to turn out all right." He might have been badly hurt there, and then if Garton hadn't felt something tap his elbow, it was a nightstick. He turned his head to see Officer Frank Metchin, another one of Derry's finest. "Never mind, little buddy," Metchin told Garton. "Mind your business and leave those little gay boyos alone. Have some fun." "Did you hear what he called me?" Garton asked hotly. He was now joined by Unwin and Dobey. The two of them, smelling trouble, tried to urge Garton up the midway, but Garton shrugged them away. He would have turned on them with his fists if they had persisted. His masculinity had borne an insult which he felt must be avenged. Nobody suggested he suck the root. Nobody. "I don't believe he called you anything," Machin replied, "and you spoke to him first, I believe. Now move on, Sonny. I don't want to have to tell you again." "He called me queer." "Are you worried you might be then?" Machin asked, seeming to be honestly interested, and Garton flushed a deep, ugly red. During this exchange, Haggerty was trying with increasing desperation to pull Adrian Mellon away from the scene. Now, at last, Mellon was going, "Ta-ta, love!" Adrian called cheekily over his shoulder. "Shut up, candy-ass," Machin said. "Get out of here." Garton made a lunge at Mellon, and Machin grabbed him. I can run you in, my friend, Machen said, and the way you're acting, it might not be such a bad idea. Next time I see you, I'm gonna hurt you, Garton bellowed after the departing pair, and the heads turned to stare at him. And if you're wearing that hat, I'm gonna kill you. This town don't need no faggots like you. Without turning, Melon waggled the fingers of his left hand. The nails were painted cerise, and put an extra little wiggle in his walk. Garton lunged again. One more word or one more move, and in you go, Machen said mildly. Trust me, my boy, for I mean exactly what I say. Come on, Webby, someone said uneasily. Mellow out. You guys like that? Webby asked, Machen ignoring Chris and Steve completely. Huh? About the bum punchers, I'm neutral, Machen said. What I'm really in favor is peace and quiet, and you're upsetting what I like, Pizza Face. Now, do you want to go around with me or what? Come on, Webby, Steve DuPois said quietly. Let's go get some hot dogs. Webby went, straightening his shirt with exaggerated moves and brushing his hair out of his eyes. Machen, who also gave a statement this on the morning following Adrian Mellon's death, said, "The last thing I heard him say as him and his buddies walked off was, 'Next time I see him, he's going to be in some serious hurt.'" 6. Please, I gotta talk to my mother, Steve DePie said for the third time. I gotta get her to mellow out my stepfather, or there's going to be one hell of a punching match when I get home. In a little while, Officer Charles Averino told him. Both Averino and his partner, Barney Morrison, knew that Steve DePay would not be coming home tonight, and maybe not for many nights to come. The boy did not seem to realize how heavy this particular bust was, and Averino would not be surprised when he learned later on that DePay had left school at the age of 16, and that at that time he'd still been in Water Street Junior High. His IQ was 68, according to the Wechsler, and he had taken during one of his 3 tips through 7th grade. Tell us what happened when you saw Mellon coming out of the Falcon, Morrison invited. No, man, I better not. Well, why not? Averina asked. I already talked too much, maybe. You came to talk, Averina said. Isn't that right? Well, yeah, but... Listen, Morrison said warmly, sitting down next to Debe and shooting him a cigarette. You think me and Chick here like fags? I don't know. Do we look like we like fags? No, but well, we're your friends, Steve-O, Morrison said solemnly, and believe me, you and Chris and Webby need all the friends you can get just about now, because tomorrow every bleeding heart in this town is going to be screaming for you guys' blood. Steve W. looked dimly alarmed. Averino, who could almost read the hairbag's pussy little mind, suspected that he was thinking about his stepfather again. And although Averina had no liking for Derry's small gay community, like every other cop on the force, he would enjoy seeing the Falcon shut up forever. He would have been delighted to drive Dubby home himself. He would, in fact, have been delighted to hold Dubby's arms while Dubby's stepfather beat the creep to oatmeal. Averino did not like gays, but this did not mean he believed that they should be tortured and murdered. Mellon had been savaged when they had brought him up from under the canal bridge. His eyes had been open and bulging with terror, and this guy here had absolutely no idea of what he had helped do. We didn't mean to hurt him, Steve repeated. This was his fallback position when he became even slightly confused. That's why you want to get out front with us, Averino said earnestly. Get the true facts of the matter out front, and this maybe won't amount to a piss hole in the snow. Isn't that right, Barney? As rain, Morrison agreed. One more time. What do you say, Averino coaxed. Well, Steve said, and then slowly began to talk. 7. When the Falcon was opened in 1973, Elmer Curdy thought his clientele would consist of mostly bus riders. The terminal next door serviced 3 different lines, Trailways, Greyhound, and Aroostook County. What he failed to realize was how many of the passengers who ride the buses are women or families with small children in tow. Many of the others kept their bottle of brown bags and never got off the bus at all, and those who did were usually soldiers and sailors who wanted no more than a quick beer or 2. You couldn't very well go on a bender during a 10-minute rest stop. Curdy had begun to realize some of these home truths by 1977, but by then it was too late. He was up to his tits and bills, and there was no way he could see out of the red ink. The idea of burning the place down for some insurance occurred to him, but unless he hired a professional to torch it, he supposed he would be caught. And he had no idea where professional arsonists hung out, anyway. He decided in February of that year that he would give it until July 4th. If things didn't look as if they were turning around by then, he would simply walk out the door, get a hound, and see how things looked in Florida. But in the next 5 months, an amazing, quiet sort of prosperity came to the bar, which was painted black and gold inside and decorated with stuffed birds. Elmer Curdy's brother had been an amateur taxidermist who specialized in birds, and Elmer inherited the stuff when he died. Suddenly, instead of drawing 60 beers and pouring maybe 20 drinks a night, Elmer was drawing 80 beers and pouring 100 drinks, 120, sometimes 160. His clientele was young, polite, and almost exclusively male. Many of them dressed outrageously, but those were years when outrageous dress was almost the norm. Elmer Curdy did not realize that his patrons were just about almost exclusively gay until 1981 or so. If Derry residents had heard him say this, they would have laughed and said that Elmer Curdy must think they had all been born yesterday. But his charm was perfectly true. Like the man with the cheating wife, he was practically last to know, and by the time he didn't care. The bar was making money, and while there were 4 other bars in Derry which turned a profit, the Falcon was the only one where rambunctious patrons did not particularly demolish the whole place, and there were no women to fight over. For one thing, these men, fags or not, seemed to have learned the secret of getting along with each other, which their heterosexual counterparts did not know. Once he became aware of the sexual preference of his regulars, he seemed to hear lurid stories about the Falcon everywhere. These stories had been circulating for years, but not until 81, Curdy simply hadn't heard them. The most enthusiastic tellers of these tales, he came to realize, were men who wouldn't be dragged into the Falcon with a chain fall for fear of all the muscles would go out of their wrists or something. Yet they seemed privy to all sorts of information. According to the stories, you could go in there any night and see men close dancing, rubbing their cocks together out on the dance floor, men French kissing at the bar, and men getting blowjobs in the bathrooms. There was supposedly a room out back where you went if you wanted to spend a little time on the Tower of Power, and there was a big fellow in a Nazi uniform back there who kept his arm greased most of the way to his shoulder, who would be happy to take care of you. Holy fuck. Wow. In fact, none of these things were true. When folks with the thirst did come into the bus station for a beer and a highball, they sensed nothing out of the ordinary in the Falcon at all. There were a lot of guys, sure, but there was no different than 1,000 working men's bars across the country. The clientele was gay, but gay was not a synonym for stupid. If they wanted a little outrageousness, they went to Portland. If they wanted a lot of outrageousness, Ramrod-style outrageousness, or Peck's Big Boy-style outrageousness, they went down to New York or Boston. Derry was small. Derry was provincial. And Derry's small gay community understood the shadow under which it existed quite well. Don Haggerty had been coming to the Falcon for 2 or 3 years on the night of March 1984 when he first showed up with Adrian Mellon. Before then, Haggerty had been the sort who plays the field, rarely showing up with the same escort half a dozen times. But by late April it had become obvious to Elmer Curdy, who cared very little about such things, that Haggerty and Mellon had a steady thing going. Haggerty was a draftsman with an engineering firm in Bangor. Adrian Mellon was a freelance writer who published anywhere and everywhere he could. Airline magazines, confession magazines, regional magazines, Sunday supplements, sex letter magazines. He had been working on a novel, but maybe that wasn't serious. He had been working on it since the 3rd year of college, and that had been 12 years ago. He had come to Derry to write a piece about the canal. He was on an assignment in New England Byways, a glossy bi-monthly that was published in Concord. Adrian Mellon had taken his assignment because he could squeeze Byways for 3 weeks' worth of expense money, including a nice room at the Derry townhouse, and gather all the material he needed for a piece in maybe 5 days. During the other 2 weeks, he could gather enough material for maybe 4 other regional pieces. But there was a 3-week period. During that 3-week period, he met Don Haggerty, and instead of going back to Portland when his 3 weeks of the cuff were over, he found himself a small apartment on the Kossuth line. He lived there for 6 weeks, and then he moved in with Don Haggerty. 8. That summer, Haggerty told Harold Gardner and Jeff Reeves was the happiest summer of his life. He should have been on the lookout, he said. He should have known that God only puts the rug under guys like him in order to jerk it out from under their feet. The only shadow, he had said, was Adrian's extravagantly partisan reaction to Derry. He had a t-shirt which said, "Maine ain't bad, but Derry's great," and he had Derry Tigers high school jacket, and of course there was the hat. He claimed he found the atmosphere vital and creatively invigorating. And perhaps there was something to this. He had taken his languishing novel out of the trunk for the first time in nearly a year. Was he really working on it, then? Gardner asked Haggerty, not really caring, but wanting to keep Haggerty primed. Yes, he was busting pages. He said it might be a terrible novel, but there was no longer going to be a terrible, unfinished novel. He expected to finish it by his birthday in October. Of course, he didn't know what Derry was really like. He thought he did, but he hadn't been there long enough to get a whiff of the real Derry. I kept trying to tell him, but he wouldn't listen. "And what's Derry really like?" Don Reeves asked. "It's a lot like a dead stumper with maggots squirming out of her coos," Don Haggerty said. The two cops stared in silent amazement. "It's a bad place," Haggerty said. "It's a sewer." "You mean you two guys don't know that? You guys have lived here all your lives, and you don't know that?" Neither of them answered. After a little while, Haggerty went on. "I see the bad feels. The cellar smell from the last chapter." Until Adrian Mellon entered his life, Don had been planning to leave Derry. He had been there for 3 years, mostly because he agreed to a long-term lease on an apartment with the world's most fantastic river-view. But now the lease was almost up, and Don was glad. No more long commute back and forth to Bangor. No more weird vibes. In Derry, he once told Adrian, it always felt like 13 o'clock. Adrian might think Derry was a great place, but it scared Don. It was not just the town's tightly homophobic attitude, an attitude that clearly expressed the town's preachers, as by the graffiti in Battersea Park, but that was one thing he hadn't been able to put his finger on. Adrian had laughed. "Don, every town in America has a contingent that hates the gay folk," he said. "Don't tell me you don't know that. This is, after all, the era of Ronnie Morden and Phyllis Housefly." "Come down to Battersea Park with me," Don had replied, after seeing that Adrian really meant what he was saying. And what he was really saying was that Derry was no worse than any other fair-sized town in the Hitherlands. "I want to show you something, my love." They drove to Battersea Park. This had been mid-June, about a month before Adrian's murder, Haggerty told the cops. He took Adrian into the dark, the vaguely unpleasant-smelling shadows of the Kissing Bridge, and he pointed out one of the graffiti. Adrian had to strike a match and hold it up before the writing in order to read it. "Show me your cock, queer, and I'll cut it off." "I know how people feel about gays," John said quietly. "I got beaten up at a truck stop in Dayton when I was a teenager. Some fellows in Portland set my shoes on fire outside of the sandwich shop, while this fat-assed old cop sat inside his cruiser and laughed. I've seen a lot, but I've never seen anything quite like this. Look over here. Check it out." Another match revealed, "Stick nails in the eyes of all faggots for God." Wow! Holy crap! Whoever writes these little homilies has a good case of deep-down crazies. I'd feel better if I thought it was just one person, one isolated sickie, but—" Dunn swept his arm vaguely down the length of the Kissing Bridge. "There's a lot of this stuff, and I just don't think one person did it all. That's why I want to leave Derry, Aid. Too many places and too many people seem to have a deep-down crazies. Well, wait until I finish my novel, okay? Please? October. I promise no later. The air's better here." He didn't know it was the water he was going to have to watch out for, Don Haggerty said bitterly. Having seen the movies makes this a little bit more exciting for me because I know all of the things that it's like, oh, the sewer, that's where it is, and all these things like that. And it's like, wow, how much time do I have left? Oh no, we're running out of time, and I have lots of pages left. Okay, speed running through the rest of it. Tom Bidelay and Chief Raid Muncher leaned forward, and neither of them speaking. Chris Unwin sat with his head down, talking monotonously to the floor. This was the part they wanted to hear. This was the part that they were going to send at least 2 of these assholes to Thomason. "The fare was no good," Unwin said. "They were already taking down all of the bitchin' rides, like the Devil's Dish and the Parachute Drop, and they already had a sign on the bumper cars that said closed. Wasn't nothing open but baby rides, so we went down by the games, and Whitey saw the pitch till you win, and he paid 50 cents, and it seemed that the hat that the queer was wearing, and he pitched at that, but he kept missing it, and every time he missed he got more in a bad mood, and Steve, He's the guy who usually goes around saying mellow out, and like mellow out this and mellow out that, and why don't you fucking mellow out, you know? Only he was in the real piss up a rope mood because he took a pill, you know? And I don't know what kind of pill, a red pill, maybe it was even legal, but he keeps after Webby until I thought Webby was gonna hit him, you know? He goes, you can't even win the queer's hat. You must be really wasted if you can't even win the queer's hat. So finally the lady gives him the prize, even though the ring wasn't over it, because I think she wanted to get rid of us. I don't know, maybe she didn't, but I think she did. It was one of those noisemaker things, you know? You blow into it and it puffs up and unrolls and make a noise like a fart, you know? I used to have one of those. I got it from Halloween in New York at some fucking holiday. I thought it was pretty good, only I lost it. Or maybe somebody hawked it out of my pocket in the fucking play yard at school, you know? So then this fair's closing and we're walking out, and Steve's still on Webby about not being able to win the queer's hat, you know, and Webby ain't saying much, but I know that's a bad sign, but I was pretty faced, you know, and so I knew I oughta, like, change the subject, only I couldn't think of a subject, you know, so when we got in the parking lot and Steve says, where do you want to go, home, and then Webby goes, let's cruise by the Falcon first and see if that queer's around. Boutier and Raidmonter exchanged a glance. Boutier raised a single finger and tapped it against his cheek. Although this doofus in the engineer boot didn't know it, he was now talking about first-degree murder. So I goes, no, I gotta get home. And Webby goes, you scared to go to buy a queer bar? And I go, fuck no. And Steve's still high or something. He says, let's go grease some queer meat. Let's go grease some queer meat. Let's go grease 11. The timing was just right, enough so that things worked out wrong for everyone. Adrian Mellon and Don Haggerty came out of the Falcon after 2 beers and walked past the bus station, then linked hands. Neither of them thought about it. It was just something they did. It was 10:20 and they reached the corner and turned left. The Kissing Bridge was almost half a mile upriver from here, and they meant to cross Main Street Bridge, which was less picturesque than Kindukski was this summer low, no more than 4 feet of water sliding listlessly down the concrete pipings. When the duster drew abreast of them, Steve Dubé had spotted the two of them coming out of the Falcon and gleefully pointed them out. They were on the edge of a span. Cut in, Webby Garton screamed. The 2 men had just passed under a streetlight and had been spotted by the fact they were holding hands. This infuriated him, but not as much as the hat infuriated him. The big paper flower was nodding crazily this way and that. Cut in, goddammit! And Steve did. Chris Unwin didn't deny the active participation in what followed, but Don Haggerty told a different story. He said that Garton was out of the car almost before it stopped, and that the other 2 quickly followed. There was talk, not good talk. There was no attempt at flippancy or false coquetry on Adrian's part this night. He recognized that they were in a lot of trouble. Give me the hat, Garton said. Give it to me, queer. If I do, will you leave us alone? Adrian was wheezing with fright, almost crying. He looked from Unwin to Dubé to Garton with terrified eyes. Just give me the fucker! Adrian handed it over. Garton produced a switch knife from his left pocket of his jeans and cut it into 2 pieces. He rubbed the pieces against the seat of his jeans, and then he dropped them to his feet and stomped on them. Don Haggerty backed away a little, while their attention was divided between Adrian and the hat. He was looking, he said, for a cop. Now will you let us Adrian Mellon began, and that was when Garton punched him in the face, driving him back against the waist-high pedestrian railing of the bridge. Adrian screamed, clapping his hands to his mouth. Blood poured through his fingers. Aid! Adrian Haggerty cried, rushing and ran forward again. Dubé tripped him, and Garton booted him in the stomach, kicking him off the sidewalk and into the roadway. A car passed, and Haggerty rode to his knees and screamed at it. It didn't slow. The driver, he told Gardner Reeves, never even looked around. Shut up, queer, Dubé said, and kicked him in the side of the face. Haggerty fell to the side in the gutter, semi-conscious. A few moments later, he heard a voice, Chris Unwin's, telling him to get away before he got what his friend was getting. In his own statement, Unwin